there's a bigger conversation to be had with regards to this film around the exploitation of its source material, aka the lives of Villy and Mary Kay. And Villy Fualau is not happy. Where do we draw the line? So at what point does this become fictional rather than just lazy or not properly researched biography? This hair is not working for me today. Hi, my name's Billy. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here to talk about movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the film May December. So let's just get into it. May December came out in November 2023 and it's a fictional drama film. We'll come back to that. The story follows Elizabeth, played by Natalie Portman, an actress who is set to play the controversial and enigmatic Gracie, played by Julianne Moore in an upcoming film. She's doing this because Gracie is infamous for having an affair, having children, and subsequently a 23-year marriage with one of her students, who is now her husband, a relationship that began when she was 36 and he was 13. That's right, she was his 36-year-old teacher and he was a 13-year-old student. Now, what's really interesting about this film is that the screenplay, which was written by Sammy Birch and Alex Mechanic, was inspired by the true story of Mary Kay Letourneau, a 34-year-old teacher who was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree child rape for having an affair with her 12-year-old student, Villy Fualau. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Now, in real life, this is a true story. She had 2 children with him whilst he was underage, under the age of 15, and went on to marry him when she was released from prison when he was 21 years old. It's a disgusting, reprehensible, and complex story, and lots of other YouTubers have already talked about it, including Kayla. Again, sorry if I mispronounced that, but I'll link her video down below because I thought it was really great and it's really comprehensive and it covers like the whole timeline of events. So let's talk about the film itself. What did I think about it? To be honest, the performances were great, but I just thought it was kind of boring, honestly. We watched it in December whilst I was on holiday in Canada with my mum, so we watched it together. She slept through the whole thing, and I got bored and just started Googling the true story, which is actually a lot more interesting than the film, in my personal opinion. And basically that had me completely distracted for the whole film. From what I've seen online, people don't generally seem to be liking it all that much. Let's have a look at the reviews. Interesting. Okay, so if you Google the film, I've heard people not really liking it as well, and the audience ratings are generally 1 star. They're pretty low, but it has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, so mixed bag. It's an uncomfortable watch. I mean, the subject matter is pretty dark, and we'll talk a bit more later about the way that it's done. Didn't think the movie did all that for me personally, but there's a bigger conversation to be had with regards to this film around the exploitation of its source material, aka the lives of Villy and Mary Kay. And Villy Fualau is not happy. I saw this article in Rolling Stone, which again I'll link down below and also show on screen a little bit now. Let me actually start recording my screen so you can see. But yeah, I came across this article in Rolling Stone that Villy is offended by the film. It's probably worth mentioning just before we jump into this article that Mary Kay Letourneau actually died. So she is not alive, meaning that's generally what happens when you die, is you're no longer alive. So Villy is the only surviving voice in this story and the only one who could tell it truthfully. What's written in this article is that Villy was not contacted by Netflix during the making of the movie. He said, if they had reached out to me, we could have worked together on a masterpiece. Instead, they chose to do a rip-off of my original story. I'm offended by the entire project and the lack of respect given to me, who lived through a real story and is still living it. I mean, that's just heartbreaking. He is 40 now. He lost his entire childhood to this story, and I think it's quite clear from what he said that he's still struggling with the consequences of that now. It's just incredibly irresponsible of Netflix to tell this kind of story without doing adequate research. Sammy Birch, one of the writers that I mentioned earlier, said that the true story of Villy and Mary Kay was a jumping off point, in his words. But I do think there's a question to be asked of where do we draw the line in that kind of case? Yeah, the Rolling Stone article talks about a lot of similarities between the real story and May December. The article talks about both husbands being of AAPI descent, which is Pacific Islander and something else, Asian American and Pacific Islander descent. Both husbands are of the same descent. Both wives give birth to children in prison while serving time for child rape. Both couples marry after the woman is released from jail. And this is a crazy thing. So one bit of dialogue even came directly from a TV interview of the real life couple. Now, I saw this in Kayla's video and it actually is shocking. I'll try and show us side by side or play them one after the other so you can see. But they literally took the, oh my God, my brain. They literally took the wording that she used in this interview, in this really creepy, predatory interview where she is very clearly controlling Billy still, even though he's now a grown adult. And they use it as inspiration for this scene where she's talking about being the boss. It's ridiculous.
You were the adult.
You can say that.
I am saying that.
I was by age. I was by age.
And by
Let's just say
maturity.
that. You maybe.
You were a teacher, Mary. You
Doesn't
can't say I
matter.
was immature.
But you don't know him.
No, but I don't need to know him in this discussion. He's the child.
Who was
I'm
the
talking
boss?
about you.
Who was the boss?
What was his name?
Who was the boss?
What?
Who was the boss back
You know,
then?
there was me pursuing you, but
Who was the boss back then?
this is ridiculous.
No,
This
who
is
was?
ridiculous.
Who was? Just say.
Just say.
Who was the boss?
All I knew was what I knew back then.
But who was the boss?
He was 13, Mary.
But who was the boss?
This is getting weird.
Who was the boss? Who?
I'm pursuing the relationship.
Who was the boss?
Well, I was the pursuer.
Yes.
Mary, even as you're
But-
hearing this now, come on, he was 13.
Doesn't matter.
It absolutely matters.
Oh, well, flaw me.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm saying, what if I was too young?
You seduced me.
But I was 13 years old.
Don't give me that.
But I was.
I don't care how old you were. Who was in charge?
What?
Who was the boss? Who was in charge? Who was in charge?
The article also talks about both couples reaching an impasse later in life because the couple did actually separate legally in 2009, which was, I think, 1 year before she died. Also, the actors who played Gracie and Joe researched Mary and Villy respectively in their process, including giving the character of Gracie a lisp, which was based on the, quote, lazy tongue that Julianne Moore thought that Mary Kay spoke with. So I guess the point is that if the plot was inspired by the true story and the characters are based on the real life people and the conversations that they have are based on real life conversations that are visible on the internet to this day, where do we draw the line? So at what point does this become fictional rather than just lazy or not properly researched biography or biopic? Like what? Because the ages were changed by a couple of years for both the characters. Is that enough to change the substance of the story? I found that it's also told in this really like salacious, titillating kind of way, with Natalie Portman acting as this voyeuristic window through which she sees and tries to create the truth. In particular, two scenes spring to mind. So there's the masturbation scene, which obviously I'm not going to show here, and the very final scene of the film in which Elizabeth, Natalie Portman's character, obsessively films take after take, saying that they're finally almost at the truth of it. The director, Todd Haynes, does typically produce films that involve odd sexual dynamics. His Wikipedia page reads, "His protagonists are invariably social outsiders whose subversive identity and sexuality put them at odds with the received norms of their society. In the Haynes universe, sexuality, especially deviant and unconventional sexuality, is a subversive and dangerous force that disrupts social norms and is often repressed brutally by dominant power structures." So you can see why he was picked for this film. It also interestingly states that many of his films are unconventional portraits of popular artists and musicians. This includes Karen Carpenter, David Bowie, and Bob Dylan. I thought that was really interesting because he has worked on many films that are biographical or interesting takes on a well-known person in reality. So what I'm hearing from that is he's experienced in creating sexually subversive stories, and he's also experienced in creating biopics. So what happened? I think it's a real shame, and reading the article, my big takeaway from it was that Villy is quite clearly open to creating something, some sort of media about his story, selling his story, doing it properly. So to me, it just feels lazy and exploitative. Did they just not want to do the research properly? Did they not want to compensate him? Which you think, if you're talking about someone's traumatic story, that would be the first and ethical thing to do. It actually really reminds me of the whole Blonde saga, which was a fictional biography or some BS based on the life of Marilyn Monroe, which again, although beautifully shot and superbly acted by Ana de Armas, faces the same criticisms of being exploitative, unethical, and honestly just quite disgusting. It's just a horrible story. It's a horrible story about a deeply traumatized and mentally ill woman, and they slapped Marilyn's name on it to get attention. Like, can you just do that? You can publish a biography of someone's life and it can be completely false. Like, is that how it works? Can I just write a story about a woman who slaps on a pink wig and goes gay clubbing in Brighton on a Friday night and say that, and just slap on the name Queen Elizabeth? Is that how that works? Like, I actually read the Joyce Carol Oates, is that her name? I actually read, why is this so hard to say? I actually read the book by Joyce Carol Oates years ago, and I thought it was absolute trash. So I knew what was coming in that film. I was not surprised at all. But I thought the book was vile, and I thought it was exploitative. It's exploitative because it tries to rewrite the history of a woman who was exploited her entire life and is no longer around to defend herself. But it's also a terribly written book that just could have been a third of the length. I guess that's what it really boils down to, isn't it? Marilyn isn't around to defend her name and her story, whilst Villy still is and should have been consulted. It's incredibly unethical to draw all this attention to his story without his input, without his consent, and without his voice. There is no voice better with which to tell this story. It's a story that's incredibly sensitive. You know, let's just say it, she's a pedophile, and people don't want to say that because she's a pretty blonde white woman. But it's a fact. And I think unless you have the contributions of someone like Villy, a story like that is never going to be told well. I really do hope that someone picks up his offer to work with him on an informed version of this story. I really hope that he's able to find some peace and happiness after experiencing such abuse and trauma at such a young age. And most of all, I hope that he gets his bag, because he's manifesting that shit and it's what he deserves. He and we deserve an actually good version of this story told properly and told in an informed way. But yeah, I really hope that studios stop doing that. It's deeply unethical and exploitative to just create these fictionalized versions of real people's lives, especially when those people are still here watching it with the rest of us. Crazy. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Subscribe if you haven't, and yeah, that's it. Love ya.